reimagining your supplier relationships. And in a short while, he'll actually be joined by Makiko Barrett from Automation Anywhere. So Greeley, before I turn things over to you, what were your 2 truths and a lie? Do you remember?
Yeah, no, I do. So I bought an air fryer to use to cook to get me through COVID times. So I said that I cooked 3 things: salmon, a whole chicken, and a pot pie. One of those was not true.
I don't really know how an air fryer works, so I don't know which one to even guess. I'm just going to guess the whole chicken because it sounds really big.
No, I did do the whole chicken,
Okay.
and it was the pot pie that I didn't do. But the tip of the day is don't cook a whole chicken in an air fryer. I've about set like the whole place on fire, but that's a whole nother story.
I'm going to file that one away then. All right. Well, then, Greeley, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Okay. Do you want to bring Makiko in now, or you want me to go through my presentation?
You go through yours, and then that way she doesn't just have to sit and hang it. So.
Okay. So now I'm going to push this button, right?
Yeah.
We tested this yesterday.
I'm going to stay on until I know you're good.
There we go.
You got it.
Okay, good. Okay, now hopefully I can advance it. All right, good. Hello, everyone. It's good to be with you today. It was great to hear Caitlin and Michelle talk about what they're doing with their travel programs. Especially, I jotted down a couple words here like pivoting and scrappy and really just the proactive nature that they're taking with the program. So now we want to shift into the supplier side as we do that. So now let me do that. So these are 3 words that I've heard a lot of travel leaders saying over the last few months. It's overwhelming, it's challenging and frustrating. And the overwhelming was probably at the beginning as everybody shifted their programs, brought travelers home. But now we're kind of getting into this challenging and frustrating part. And a lot of that has to do with not only dealing internally, but also dealing externally with the suppliers. And that's because we've seen furloughs, reductions, staffing reductions, financial challenges, both with the corporation and the supplier. But on the supplier side, it's really impacting how you're all able to get your business done. And that's why I'm starting to hear, from travel leaders that I've been talking to, the frustration that you have. So, you haven't been able to reach people. You're trying to do RFPs, and we're going to get a little bit deeper with this with Makiko. But the other thing, too, is the financial challenges. We're hearing certain things come up about that. We're hearing TMCs wanting to implement new fee structures. We just read on the Beat Live yesterday about Concur implementing some new pricing, which means ultimately, for those of you that are using a reseller, will flow to the TMC and ultimately flow to you. So now we're having, in this time of flux and uncertainty, we're having to deal with these fee changes, potential fee changes and whatnot. And I guess the way that I've been looking at it is that's really creating an opportunity, because if somebody is presenting fee changes to you, it's really, I think, giving you the license to say, well, wait a minute, now let's look at the value. Let's look at what we're really getting and what we're really paying for. Now that we don't have any travel, the travel machine has come to a stop. Let's evaluate and see if this is the right way. And the reason I wanted to mention this is I've been talking to a lot of smaller tech companies over the last few weeks and months that sense this time as an opportunity. And they're looking at new products and new offerings to really improve the process. And so we'll talk about those here in a second. And then just a couple of the data points to throw out there. I was talking to a senior leader with a hotel chain, global hotel chain, 2 weeks ago. And she was telling me that the good times that we had with business and business travel the last few years, it really masked a lot of the challenges. There were a lot of hotels that were surviving because business was so good. But then with what happened with COVID, it really exposed some of the challenges that those properties are having. And that's why a lot of hotel properties won't be able to reopen. And then yesterday I was with attending an online event. New York University had a hotel investor conference. And they had the CEO of a restaurant group, STK, and Kona Grill. And he was talking about that they started to sense customer experience is changing and what the customer wanted a few years ago. And now with COVID, it's actually accelerated that. So if you take all these data points that times were good, we probably glossed over the chance to really look at how we could improve the process. But now we can and improve your supplier relationship. So let me just talk about and introduce a couple terms. So right now, we really have what we call a single channel business travel booking process. And that's what all of our policies, when I was a travel buyer, this is what my policy said. You know, the travelers, you have to use this TMC, you have to use this online booking tool 100% of the time, and then you're off on your trip. That's what our policy says. But in reality, we're really having this multi-channel process. And you'll see that air and car, for the most part, still flows through the TMC and through the OPT. But on the hotel side, this is where it's going through brand.com, booking sites. And we know, right, that the average leakage rate on hotel bookings is 40% on a global basis. But these two channels are not connected. So travelers have different experiences when they go through those channels. Also, you're not getting, of course, the data for duty of care. But this is really what the future is going to look like. And this is where I wanted to introduce this. This is the omni-channel. Now, I've heard a lot of people say, well, what is omni-channel? Does that mean we get rid of our TMC? It sounds like I have to implement a bunch of new technology. And those really are not factual when it comes to looking at this. What omni-channel is really saying is, let's create one policy that will flow through all these different aspects of a trip, from the booking, through your TMC, sending people direct to brand.com. You'll be able to then get the data that will support your duty of care, will support expense processing, and of course, that's all tied together through virtual payment. And then for those companies that are really focused on sustainability. But this data lake is really a chance for us to bring raw data in a way that allows us to service all these different functions within the travel booking process. So this then creates a very connected experience for your travelers, whether they're booking through the TMC, whether they're booking through brand.com. They can still have the same experience, the same access to the discounts, but they might prefer different channels for different reasons. And so that's what this is really about, looking at this omni-channel solution. And now is a better time, no better time to look at it because, as I mentioned, travel has really come to a standstill. So again, we'll get into this a little bit deeper, but that's what it's all about. Thinking about these supplier relations and looking at things differently, where you can create value, and doing that now, because again, travels, for the most part, for most companies, come to a standstill. And even with companies that are still traveling, I was talking to an essential business last week, and she was still telling me that even though they're designated by the government, that their people are still on the road, they're still having challenges reaching their suppliers. They're still having challenges with their TMCs wanting to increase their fees. So it's happening whether you do have travel going on today or not. So why don't we go ahead and bring in Makiko. So Jen, can you please make that happen? And here she comes. Hello, Makiko.
Hi.
Hi. Good to see you again. We were sitting at the table earlier sharing truths and lies and all sorts of fun stuff.
Yes.
So wanted to bring you into this discussion. So can you just give me kind of your opening thoughts, having heard, you know, what we heard Caitlin and Michelle talking about, and also what I just described from the supplier side. Can you give us your thoughts, please, on supplier relations and what you're seeing today?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And I listened to Caitlin and Michelle, and I felt this kind of the same way. So travel is slow. I think we were all really busy at the beginning to locate the travelers and make sure they're safe, they're home. But after that, it kind of stopped, right? So we all had more time on our hands. So we started looking at okay, maybe this is a great time to reset the program. So it could be, trying to go out to an RFP for TMC or looking at other suppliers. I've heard a lot of my friends in travel business did the same thing, but they also hit the roadblock, which was, a lot of furloughs happened. So TMCs were actually not available to even do RFI. Unless you're a big company, like I am small startup. So SMBs struggle more because they don't really want your business, or not in these times. So you can get the suppliers to come to the table. Hotels, I started the RFP process now, not the full blown like normal, but started talking to the hotels. Then I found out a lot of people were gone. So, we want to reset the program, we want to rethink, but then the others are not coming to the table, right? So I think a lot of us can relate to that problem.
Yeah, and I think that's, when we were talking about this, it just blew my mind that here companies are looking to engage with suppliers, but because of furloughs and staff reductions, they're basically saying, we're not going to participate. We're not going to, at a time that they need more revenue and more money, coming out of this. It just boggles my mind. And I understand, it's tough, but my gosh, if you're not able to at least entertain new sales, kind of makes the future a little bit bleak. So now let's ask the audience. So we want to bring everybody into this one. We have an audience poll, and the way that we're going to do this is through the Q&A. So if you click on the Q&A tab on the right side, you'll see the question, and then you'll see yes or no. So have supplier staff reductions impacted your ability to manage your corporate programs and prompted you to seek out new suppliers? So just check on yes and as appropriate, or no. So I think right now we're seeing, again, that this is, we've got no catching up to yeses. So I think, right now it's split. But I guess this is what tells me then, Makiko, when you've reached out to suppliers and you're not getting a response, is there a way to elevate or escalate, to try to get that attention? What have you found then in being able to get the attention of people, or people just say, no, I can't help you, you're on your own?
I think that, your network helps, right? So I try to network with the industry peers as much as possible, whether it's buyer or supplier. And then if your account manager is furloughed, like my case, my account manager is not coming back until January. So I would reach out and say, hey, who else is working? Who can help me? So having that resource is really important. But for me, I think large companies with dedicated travel counselors team, or, if you're paying for the full-time account manager, maybe you're not impacted, right? Because you're paying for that service. But for small business like my company and a lot of others, we use a shared team, and account manager is also shared with other accounts, right? So like for myself, I had to change my business continuity plan because my backup was supposed to be my account manager, and she's not there, and not many people are working. So I had to rethink that. So absolutely, I think for SMBs, we see more impact than larger companies with dedicated teams.
Yeah, and then that's had, like you mentioned, then you had to rethink how you do that, how you have your continuity plan and backups and everything in place. And we're gonna end today our session with a plan B and some steps to take. So now let's move on to the next question, and this is: has your TMC approached you about raising fees? Yes or no? So if you could please click on that. And as I mentioned, the one travel buyer that I talked to last week, essential business, and they were approached by their agency. I've talked to other buyers that have also been approached and said, look, we need to have a discussion about this. So it looks like at least now. So the people that voted, has your TMC approached you about raising fees? We have 3 votes there. I'm not sure if those are 3 yes votes. So it looks like, based upon our numbers, so it looks like the majority have not been approached, which then I guess comes back to what is causing that. Is it TMC driven? Is it the type of program, Makiko, you mentioned, whether a company is already paying for certain account management services or whatever the case might be. Although now it looks like the yeses are somewhat catching up to the no's. So what's your experience been, Makiko, with TMC relationship and fees right now?
I haven't been asked by my TMC yet. And in fact, it's surprising, but I even have to nudge them for monthly invoices because I'm not even getting those. And which is really
lately? That's lately?
Isn't that like part of your revenue? But I think they're so short-staffed that they can't even get to it. And I think that's a huge problem. But also, I hear more from bigger companies that they have been approached by TMC to change the fee structures. Right. Maybe they're going after the big fish. Who knows? I am so small that maybe they don't really care. So I plan to stay under the radar as much as I can.
Okay. Yeah, we don't want to announce about your invoices.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. So maybe
but that's a little bit, but just to interject there for a second. I mean, it goes back to what you mentioned earlier. You've had trouble reaching out to suppliers to talk about new business or to get answers. And now a situation where apparently due to furloughs or short staff, there's no invoices. Oh, Jen.
I just apologize for popping in, but we had a few comments about fees come in through the chat that I wanted to make sure you saw. So some people are saying not raising fees, but they're adding fees. So like there's a contact fee or a fee for non-revenue generated transactions. So just thought that might be useful.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, just reading what Sally put in here, fee for non-revenue, not for the US, APAC and EMEA, a small contract, yes and no. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. But yeah, it's just interesting, right? As far as the staff impacting staffing or staffing impacting response as well as invoicing.
Yeah. I think, contact fee, I think I've seen a small refund fee, transaction fees come in Europe, but nothing in the US. But I think it will come eventually. But my stance is, well, we're locked in a contract. So how do you propose the fees? But I do understand it's a tough time for all of our industry members. They lost a lot of revenue due to the lockdown. And we don't see the ends to it, right? I heard it might not come back to the 2019 level until 2022 or 2023.
Yeah.
So they have to think about it. Otherwise, they may not survive. But they have to come up with something innovative. So they can't just say, oh, we're hurting financially, so I'm going to raise your fees. I think no corporation is going to say, oh, okay, sure, I understand. I think you'll see a lot of fight because we are struggling too. A lot of companies lost revenue. It's slower. Right. So my CFO's number one goal right now is to have the cash reserve for the rainy day fund. So we don't want to spend money either. And then unless they can justify the reasons for raising fees, not because they're hurting, but they're adding this innovation to the platform, or they would completely change from the old-fashioned way to something new. Then, we could come to the table and negotiate, but we won't just say, sure, we'll pay because you're hurting. It just doesn't work that way. And I am really concerned about the financial stability of the vendors right now, TMCs mostly because it's like a backbone of all the travel program, right? So, I think most of us are not paying upfront. So yeah, we might not lose money, but we have a ton of unused tickets on file with them. So what happens if they get acquired? How would it change? or if they go belly up, for lack of a better word, what would happen to my unused tickets? I have a lot of money sitting there. And I think assessing the risk of the vendors is going to be really, really important going forward when you select vendors.
Yeah, and I think a couple quick thoughts that, when somebody comes and says we want to raise a fee, to your point, it's like, okay, well, that's going to open the door to looking at the value that we're getting, because companies right now are not just saying, oh, okay, yeah, you're having challenges, so we'll give you more revenue, especially if it's for taking a phone call or helping people out. The other thing that I've been seeing is, the transaction fee revenue, or the revenue from the corporation based upon data, is roughly a third of a TMC's revenue. The other 2/3 still comes from the suppliers. Even though you maybe have net rates, there's still overrides and other revenue streams that come in. So that 2/3 revenue is down because, again, travel is diminished. So that type of transaction revenue, override revenue, isn't coming in. But I think this is going to open up the door to saying, we want greater transparency, right? We're not just going to give you more money because we want to understand the value. We want to understand the full revenue picture. We want more transparency. We want to understand your financial situation. And again, this is why I mentioned some of the suppliers I've been talking to that sense an opportunity, saying, well, wait a minute, maybe we should be looking at distribution fees. Is there a way to have some of the easy type reservations flow through other channels? What should be appropriate to flow through our TMC? And that's why people are looking at omnichannel and some of these other areas to go direct and save distribution fees and different things. Okay, so now let's move on to another topic, and that is, I'm sorry, I forgot I had this. This was some BTN research that just came out, I think, a couple of days ago, as far as the appetite for higher TMC fees. So do you expect to pay higher TMC fees in 2021? 24% said yes. And then you'll see, from 43 to 75% that said no or not sure. So again, we'll have to see how this works itself out as we get into 2021. All right, so then let's talk about changes, because we heard Caitlin say that she's been using this downtime to look at their program. How have you been looking at this, and how have you been using this downtime and any sort of internal discussions? And while we do that, let's take a look at people voting here. If people had challenges, with stakeholders, talking with stakeholders on making changes now. So Makiko, why don't you kick us off with some of your thoughts, and we'll see how the votes come in on this one.
Yes, I certainly had a lot of challenges getting the internal stakeholder buy-in, especially my CFO. So like everyone else, I didn't go out to bid for TMC, but because I was halfway through the contract, I started looking, right? So I started meeting with the TMC, and I like to keep myself updated on the new technology and new things that's coming. So I looked into that, and I came across this new tech-savvy TMC that I was actually really excited about making the changes. And it's buyer's market as well, if you think about it. So I thought, if there's no cost to switch to a better platform, why not? So I did the cost analysis, and I did pros and cons and scorecard, and I did everything, and I had perfect pitch for my CFO. Well, it got shut down because he said, well, this sounds all great, but, our TMC is not perfect, but we have a coverage. So there is no travel in foreseeable future. So instead of spending time on travel, can you help out with other department? And I was put in charge for the indirect procurement. So now I have them reporting under me. And I'm like, wow, I failed completely.
What do you think? So in one way, you took on more responsibility, which is a good thing. So clearly you didn't fail there. So your scope expanded, but expanded outside of travel. So you just feel like the frustration of look, I had this great initiative. We could improve our program. We can do this, this, and this. But there just wasn't an appetite to listen to it, right?
No. And I think it's more so if you have to spend money, because, a lot of corporations are not willing to spend additional money or get locked in multi-year contract, right?
Okay.
So, but my deal was no cost. So I was actually really excited. This was the most exciting thing happened in the lockdown period. But it didn't. And I am pretty sure that other companies are feeling the same way. A lot of travel managers are, spending time because we have more time now to reevaluate and potentially switch. But number one, the suppliers are not coming to the table. Number two, your C-level might think differently. So you have to be really nimble and flexible and be able to pivot your strategy.
Yeah, so the results show that 7 said no, they have not had challenges. So that's good. And then 4 that have had challenges. Let me just check the chat here before Jen comes back on and says we should check the chat. Nope, nothing in the chat. Okay.
I'm curious to know, so those who said, no, I don't have any challenges, what changes you were able to make?
Yeah, let's see here. If anybody wants to put anything into the chat. Yeah, because is it, I've heard some people say, well, we're just going to continue our program status quo, just with reduced volumes. And then when we come out on the other side, we'll see what it looks like. Then I've heard people like yourself say, no, we're using this time and looking at doing this. So if you think about supplier relationships, kind of moving forward, especially as we think about this omni-channel world and being able to use the technology today from cloud-based to being able to share data better. Some people, they've been asking me like, well, why do we've got our data working? I go, well, if you still think about it, you still have TMC data, you still maybe have credit card data, maybe you have somebody putting those together, but it's still kind of messy. And the future will be that basically you would just have all that raw data going into what they call the data lake, and then you can extract exactly what you need. So it looks like Michelle's talking about here policy changes surrounding traveler well-being, no supplier changes. So I think maybe that's kind of the key, that people that have been able to implement policy changes around the traveler have probably not had any challenges, but nothing as far as any supplier changes. So Makiko, let's kind of just go back and just close out this about the TMCs and the fee increases. So how do you think, what's your view on what a model should look like as far as pricing and how you see it coming together?
I think it's going to move towards the SaaS model where you pay per user upfront. I think software companies are doing it, and my company certainly does the same thing. It's a subscription fee, right? Because transaction fee is, well, number one, messy. And, the pricing proposal you get is like a big restaurant menu with so many different pricing options. And yes, it's easier to reallocate the charges to different departments, but I just think that one fee, like SaaS model is so much easier. And also that brings a financial stability to the TMC. But also, they have to take up on the innovation and how are they going to do with the, travel counselors, right? They're supposed to guide you through the best options and stuff, but I'm just not seeing that personally. They're still kind of order takers, and they have less experience than the road warriors, how the thing is right now at the airport. So are they really the professionals guiding my road warriors? I just don't think so. But, to answer your question, I think they will try to move away from transaction fees and go to a user-based fees.
Yeah, because imagine, to what Sally raised earlier about the fee for non-revenue generating transactions. Imagine looking at your TMC invoice and trying to say, okay, here's transaction fees. Here's a phone call fee. And how do you monitor? How do you audit that? You know,
You can't.
so when you can't. So when an invoice comes in, say, well, we took 100 phone calls and here's our fee. Well, were those phone calls connected to I mean, this is where I think it's going to get messy. And as you mentioned, a lot of the companies on this call are used to that SaaS model, that SaaS pricing model, and subscription and how that will work out. So yeah, more topics about that, and we could probably do a whole session about that. In fact, we're in the roundtable discussion that will be coming up. We actually want to get some thoughts about the TMC fees. So now just to kind of close this out, I just wanted to talk about the plan B. You mentioned the plan B earlier. You know, what to do. What should I do from a TMC perspective? What should I do for Supplier? Unfortunately, you know, can't make it financially. And then when we think about being able to review some of the options that are now out there, some of these tech companies, and again, some of them that have come into the marketplace do have kind of a SaaS subscription pricing model that I've been talking to, and that we've had some of our clients talking to as well. So just kind of wanted to run through this, because to think about doing this differently, everybody said, well, we've always had kind of this single track, you know, the traveler to the TMC to the trip, even though we had the multi-channel leakage to the hotel, but being able to have this user experience be similar no matter which channel they're using. First of all, it's a mind shift change. So these were just some of the steps that just put together to think about, well, how should we look at our program? What should we be looking at differently right now? And then basically performing an omnichannel operations analysis to really say, well, what would we have to change? And what would be involved from a technology perspective? Because I've heard some companies say, well, we don't have any money to implement. You mentioned it earlier. If there's any sort of new technology out there that, you know, how can we bring that in without having costs? Because nobody wants to make an investment right now and say, well, we're going to pay implementation fees when we're not traveling. But yet this could be a way to reduce the complexity of the travel program and the travel process. So these are just some of the things. And then building a business case, like you had mentioned that you had done with the ideas that you wanted to bring forward. So now that you kind of hit the roadblock with your plan B or looking at your new things, how do you think you'll see that playing out in the future? And how will you kind of keep readdressing that internally?
That's a really difficult question, and I think there will be a lot more changes. So I think the last maybe 10, 20 years, all the focus was to wrangle people in to use your TMC platform, right? So we talk about adoption rate a lot. That was probably like the most important thing. And if they booked outside, like really you mentioned, yes, airline tickets, I think most people have pretty good handle on it, but hotel, you know, attachment is like 40%. So you don't know what they're doing, right? But I don't think you can keep saying, oh, they didn't book with our TMC, so I don't know what they're doing. I think it becomes unacceptable at some point. So like you said, you have to have an omni-channel plan. You know, where do you get the data? Like, is it expense? Is it the card swipe data? That's more real time. Or maybe, you know, if your legal department allow it, then have like a location services turned on your phone, because, you know, everybody now has smartphones, right? So there are different ways to track. I know that sounds like a big brother watching, but there are different ways. And then, or there are tech companies like Traxo, you know, trying to capture the leakage.
Right, through the email parsing,
Right. Or use like, you know, use different vendors, but try to get the data all in one piece, and like using tech companies like Grasp or PredictX, you know, like there are so many different ways. But in terms of personnels, so let me answer a question by a question. Yeah. So like I had to let go of my staff in my department. And I hear from my friends that they had to do the same thing. You know, they had to let travel coordinator go or consultants go. I was lucky enough to have pretty good network, and there are a lot of consulting companies that offering flexible or even free services for the moment, right? What do you think travel managers can do when you cannot add overhead but you want to run this project. You need more help because you're a one-person show. What do you think we should be doing?
Well, I don't want to make it sound like a commercial for myself, but I'll speak in generalities. I think, yeah, this is where everybody has had to get creative, because it's not only the TMCs, the airlines, the hotels, but it's everybody that supports you, whether it's the consultants in the industry and whatnot. And so, I can just speak for ourselves. We've looked at different support models as well. Kind of like using a subscription retainer model, just to make it easier, because I think people want insight and they want advice, but they don't want to necessarily get locked into big projects because nobody's really getting projects approved. So I think this is where everybody just has to take a look at this, and there's different ways to provide that support, to meet the financial needs that a company has. So I think everything needs to be looked at. And, I want to go back to Sally's note here about fees go to the individual cardholders. So imagine, I'm just thinking back to my travel buyer days. Imagine now we always have to explain the value of the program and why you need to use a TMC. Imagine now if a bunch of non-transaction fees are going to go to that individual card or individual traveler on their card, that call or whatever. Imagine if they start to see those fees add up on their card. They're going to be calling saying, wait a minute, I just paid, I don't know, whatever it is, $25, $50, $100 for this trip because I called in twice or three times. Why am I doing this? So I think this is where this whole value equation is just going to get more in the spotlight. And I think this is where everybody's going to have to work together saying, okay, how do we look at this? And these are some of the things we'll cover in the roundtable. But yeah, and then being able to bring it back and have that discussion. So yeah, I think there's, to go back to your question, I think there's different ways to structure the support, because we know that people have had their teams reduced. And whether it's the firm I'm with or others, we've had to adapt. Everybody's had to adapt. And I think that's the key. You have to adapt, listen to your customers, and figure out something that will work for them, work for you in a mutually accepted way. So that's how I see how we're going to have to be going into 2021 and beyond. The old way is not coming back. So there's going to have to be a new way.
Totally agree.
So hopefully I answered your questions, since you fired questions at me. So that I think brings us, Jen, let me bring you back in, because I think we're at the end of our time. And we wanted to use this session from the early one, Jen, that you moderated with the travel program, to then the supplier relationship, to then set up some of the roundtable discussions. And you want to let everybody know about our crazy idea about the roundtables that we thought we would try?
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you both. So Makiko, we're gonna have you head back to your table so we can.
Thank you, Makiko.
Take Makiko off the stage, and Greeley, if you can stop sharing your screen, and I'm gonna share my screen instead. And Alex, if I can have you put the link to the roundtable guide in the chat in case people need that. So yes, as I said earlier, we wanted to give all of you an opportunity to sort of, talk with each other, learn from each other, share ideas. So we're going to sort of go back to those tables. Hopefully you saw either in the attendee email that you received probably yesterday or again now, we encouraged you to download and print out the discussion guide. So hopefully that will help walk you through things. I have a terrible habit of over-explaining things and then creating more confusion. So I'm going to try and do my Greeley's smiling because he knows this about me. I'm going to try and keep this as simple as possible. So we're going to take about 25 minutes for this exercise. Looking at the number of people who are logged onto the event right now, I think it would make the most sense if we could split into 4 groups. So I'm going to ask you, once we go out of presentation mode, to join either table 2, 4, 5, or the lounge. because that's where the most people were sitting previously. Alex, can you put that in the chat, table 245 or the lounge? When you get there, the first thing you're going to want to do is identify a volunteer who's going to represent your table for the report out. That person should be willing to come onto the virtual stage after the break to give a summary. So at the very least, we're going to ask you to turn your microphone on. We would love it if you would turn your camera on. If you would like to document your conversation, if you're someone who likes to whiteboard and you have experience with that, there is a whiteboard feature you can use at your table. It's optional. You can also take notes the old school way. If you're someone who just prefers to sit back and listen or is a little camera shy, maybe your role could be the whiteboard scribe. So you can think about that. The text and the sticky note feature are probably the easiest to use. During your conversations, please be sure to not share any supplier names or pricing information. I'm sure that goes without saying, but I just wanted to put that disclaimer out there to cover myself. So like I said, 25 minutes for the activity. At that point, we'll take our networking break. And then after the break, Greeley will help us to facilitate a report out. Greeley, anything you want to add in terms of the context of the discussion?
No, did we want to go through what the topics are?
So sure. So everyone should have it. But basically the overall flow is if you'd like to sort of recap your answers to the poll questions that Greeley posed to you, that might be a great place to start. Then we've got a couple questions related to TMCs and fee structures and things like that. And then what we'd like you to end with, so your homework or your deliverable, is to just come up with a really brief elevator pitch. So if you wanted to make a change to your program, and so as a group, just identify a common change that would be useful to all of you and come up with a short elevator pitch. And that's what we'll sort of ask you to share during that report out. Anything else you wanted to share, Greeley?
No, well done.
Thank you. I'm going to pause for a minute to see if there's any questions in case anyone needs any clarification. So again, take a look at that roundtable guide. We're going to do